Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for being here. I got a hell of a show for you. I always say that at the beginning of every show because everyone is a hell of a show. But seriously, I got a great guest for you. I got a bunch of important stories we're gonna get to. I got video of a protester getting the shit kicked out of him in jolly old England for calling out the royal family. We're going to get to all of that. So thanks for being here. Please take a second to hit thumbs up and the share and all that stuff because I am on the fringes of the internet. I'm hanging on. You know the poster of the cat where its nails are digging into the branch and it says hang in there? That's the part of the internet that I'm allowed to be on still, as so many of my platforms have been either shadow banned or fully deleted. So thank you for cutting through all of that, finding me. You found me out in the woods. Like you're like the folks that would find the Unabomber cabin and want to read his manifesto. Not to say I'm like the Unabomber. I am not like the Unabomber. But thank you for finding me and for being here with me. All right, so let's start with an awesome guest. How about that? He's an excellent writer and writes on a lot of topics, but some of his work that I've enjoyed the most is his discussion and analysis of the U.S. propaganda that's going on now and has been for a couple of years now against China. And right now we've got more news happening with China because the U.S. when the U.S. has to push a propaganda story, it has to come out like every couple weeks. It's not like they just do it once and they move on and they're like, all right, we said that shitty thing about China. We'll see you later. It's like every 2 weeks they got to come out with more shit. So right now, along with Russia, China seems to be enemy number one of the U.S. empire. So to bring in here to discuss and to get to the truth behind the propaganda, here is Danny Haiphong. Sorry for the delay in bringing you on. How you doing?
No problem. I'm doing good, Lee. How are you? Thanks for having me on today.
Yeah, thanks for being here. I hope you're doing all right in the end times. And I say that, who knows how long the end times could be? It could be
never ending.
Could be several hundred years. So maybe maybe we'll not have to see the tsunami part. So, I kind of want to just leave this a little free form and just go into everything that's being said right now about China. And then if we have time, I want to ask you about another one of your articles you wrote. But what's just happened this week and last week and the previous week is this latest UN report on China, on supposed human rights abuses in China. And this is in the same area of earlier reports that were all like hilariously and laughably garbage. And I covered that back. It was 2018, 2019. The Gray Zone did, let's see, where is this? The Gray Zone did a great breakdown of how insane some of this stuff was back then. A lot of it coming from Adrian Zenz, this hilarious German evangelical who says all Jews will burn in a fiery hell. And for some reason, he's like held up as like a expert on what China's doing, which is so bizarre. Or it's coming from full-on U.S. government think tanks, etc. But now this is a step further where this UN report has come out and there's a back and forth because the head of that committee has just stepped down and there's a lot of back and forth going on right here. And I was wondering if you have kind of can explain it better than I am doing right now.
Yeah, well, this report, it's very suspicious because it was ostensibly written by the UN's Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, which was Michelle Bachelet. And she had actually visited China. She went to Xinjiang. She went to Kashgar. She went to Urumqi. She went to 2 different cities. She spoke to people. She spoke to both officials all the way up to Xi Jinping, to local officials in Xinjiang. And she spoke to people who were in the vocational and educational training centers, which have been the subject of all of the problems that Adrian Zenz has essentially made up. So she went there for 5 days, from May 23rd to 28th, and she received intense backlash ever since. All summer long, the U.S. State Department, the entire American and Western political class, the Western media, were pressuring her to revise her statement, because her initial statement on that trip, 1, did not mention forced labor, 2, did not mention any genocide. So none of those words were used, not even cultural genocide. Nothing of the sort was used in the statement.
Because that's the other thing, is even in the U.S. propaganda, they say it's a cultural genocide because they generally are saying no one's being killed.
Right.
So even in the propaganda statements, it's like, I don't know if you should be saying genocide if no one's being killed, even in your imaginary version of what's happening.
Right, exactly. And so she was placed under intense pressure by the entire ruling elite, essentially. And she immediately said, there will be another report that comes out. It took months for this report to come out. And suspiciously, this report actually came out technically, if we're thinking about time in Geneva, it came out after she left. And there's no indication, unlike prior reports on human rights, like, for example, the one she wrote about the war on Yemen, there's no indication that she authored this report at all. Her name is not on it. There's no forward from her. So we don't actually know who wrote it. And so this report, ironically, also doesn't mention the word genocide, and actually only makes the conclusions that there are concerns about human rights abuses. And throughout this report, not only is the research methodology incredibly poor. I mean, I read through it. It's 48 pages long. We're talking tens of thousands of words. There is no attention to how the research that they said they were doing was conducted. They said they interviewed 40 people who lived outside of Xinjiang. We don't know who they are. We don't know how they got in touch. We don't know what their experience was inside of the region. All we know is that there are 40 people. There was not one quotation, not one single quotation from them. All of these very basic things that you would put into a report weren't there. But what there was 40 uses of the word appear and may, and all of these indicators that show that the whole report, and 4 times the report mentioned that they are not in a position, this Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the person who went to Xinjiang, is not in a position to verify their claims. So essentially what you have is, again, a bunch of claims made about China, and the same sources being recycled. You pulled up that Gray Zone article. They literally use the report that the Gray Zone debunked in 2018. They use that in the report to claim that there are 2 million Uyghurs in concentration camps, when the Gray Zone already showed that those were based on 8 interviews, and it was through the Network of Chinese Human Rights Defenders, which is an NED organization. Of course, you have the usual folks, Australian Strategic Policy Institute, cited throughout. They even cite it over and as a rebuttal to the Chinese government. This is how a tweet from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute to Nathan Rousser, who's the satellite boy, as he's called on social media, they cite his tweet over and above as a rebuttal to the Chinese government's opposition to and challenge of the claims that they have concentration camps everywhere. They say, oh, well, Nathan Rousser's tweet says there are. Like, that's how bad this report really is.
Well, one of my favorite parts of the Adrian Zenz report that was talked about in 2019 was where he said that China was forcing Uyghur women to get IUDs, and roughly 4 a day per woman.
Yes, because 4 out of 5. I believe he even fudged up the stats of 4 out of 5 women were going through forced sterilization, and the actual statistic of family planning, the increase in family planning measures was something like 8%. So he literally put a 0 in front. So that's how dishonest these sources are, and how suspicious this report is, because it's quite clear that, one, we don't know if it was written by Michelle Bachelet at all. She hasn't endorsed it. The UN Human Rights Council did not sign off on it. So we don't actually know who wrote the report, but we know what interests were driving it. And that is the fact that this narrative has actually been dying. This particular one around Xinjiang.
So I just want to show this is essentially China's response. This is Global Times, which is connected at least tangentially to the Chinese state. And they say China opposes politicizing human rights as Bachelet, who was the head of that council or committee, steps down as UN human rights chief. And China firmly opposes the release of the so-called Xinjiang-related report by UN Human Rights Office, which is a pure stunt orchestrated by the U.S. and Western countries. And then they say Chinese experts say that Bachelet's departure may be connected with a Western pressure over the report, which has already been hyped up and weaponized. At a time when the West is smearing China with human rights issues, it is increasingly difficult to remain objective, and it is hoped that Bachelet's successor can resist the pressure. And then on top of this, you, of course, have the amazing hypocrisy of the U.S. Literally, I mean, take your pick of which human rights horror show you want to point to, but the U.S. has killed 6 million innocent people with the war on terror over the past 20 years. Of course, our Native Americans are basically forced onto reservations in the United States, the ones that remain alive. There and those reservations are tightly restricted. I'm going to actually, once I'm done talking to you, I'm going to cover a story that just came out of these digital surveillance walls around one reservation to monitor Native Americans. So we have, all of these our own issues. If this was coming from someone other than the U.S. and Western countries, you might be able to be like, well, okay, at least that outlet or person or organization has a leg to stand on. But when it's coming from countries known for human rights abuses, I don't know.
Yeah, well, in the report, again, just to talk about the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, not only is that organization, it's been discredited so many times. I literally have a relationship with Twitter now to censor Twitter accounts that say the wrong things that they don't like about China. But even worse, this organization takes money, not just 37% of its funds come from the US and Australian defense departments, but then you have a litany of military contractors, all of whom, the major military, all of whom use prison labor, which the ACLU just reported on as a form of slave labor. These prison laborers, prison workers, prison slaves, they make either no money at all for their work. California will send for less than $1 an hour prisoners to put out fires. They make no money at all, or they make less than $1 per hour for their work, and they are forced to work, or they go to solitary confinement or have some other reprisals taken upon them, like they can't have family visits, etc. So this is how deep the hypocrisy goes, is that the primary sources being used to prove some kind of human rights abuses now, all the way down from genocide, it's come all the way down to just human rights abuses in the vaguest terms. In order to make these claims, they use sources that literally take money from those corporations who are not only helping wage war abroad and kill thousands, millions of people, including in this proxy war in Ukraine, but they're also using prison labor to manufacture those weapons.
So what is putting aside all of this hilarious propaganda, it's cultural genocide, it's concentration camps, it's all this, putting all that aside, what is the reality of the existence of a Uyghur in China? Because, like in the US, it's like, we are absolutely a racist society. We have systemic racism, and you can go down a long list of the evidence of systemic racism. We have a prison state. We're the largest prison state in the world with far more per capita black and brown folks in locked up than white. So there's many ways you can say that this is a racist society and has racist elements. Now, you can say all of that. It's all accurate. It's all 100% true. It doesn't mean there's a genocide being perpetrated against Black Americans. I would say it's something that we really need to deal with and we need to fix. And I talk about it endlessly. In China, is there that style of racism towards Uyghurs where there's systemic racism? It's just tougher to get a job, and the U.S. and Western countries want to point to that and say, oh, that means it's concentration camps, or like, what's the reality?
Right. Well, if that were the case, I think it would be pretty easy to identify. The reality is that ever since 1949, China has taken painstaking measures to unite and attempt to lift the standards for all ethnic groups in China, despite coming into that period at a very low level of development and in a society that was very much divided by warlords, by foreign interests and powers. It was a very difficult situation and continues to be a challenge. I mean, Xinjiang, right, just eradicated. It was one of the last provinces to eradicate extreme poverty in 2020. But the fact is that, whatever people want to say about China, this is one area that China has taken incredible amounts of effort to rectify, in the sense that ethnically, China is a very diverse country. And in order for that country to run at all, there has to be a semblance of unity. And this means paying attention to both how people live, as well as giving autonomy to those ethnic groups where it is, where it is meaningful for them. So that's why Xinjiang is called the Uyghur Autonomous Region, because Uyghurs are the majority. It's not that they are a heavy majority, but they're a majority in that region. And there's been a lot of attention to lifting their standards of living. What is very interesting to note, I think, is that over the past 30 years alone, even since 1990, the living standards for Uyghurs have gotten ever more closer, if not to parity with, if we want to just compare to Han Chinese, the majority ethnic group in all of the country, it's essentially parity at this point. Life expectancy, income, China really paid a lot of attention to how do we lift in this westernmost province that is historically very, very poor. China doesn't have a lot of arable land. It takes a lot of technology that China didn't have until the last 20 years, really. It's a lot of technology to develop agriculture in Xinjiang, to develop its urban areas. But now, living standards for Uyghurs are very comparable, if not equal to Han. And that's because there has been really affirmative action programs in a real sense, a material sense, right? Prioritizing employment and education so that wages, incomes, living standards are at parity with the rest of the country, because China was and still is unevenly developed. Guangzhou, Beijing, Shanghai, right? Very heavy development, jobs pay really high. In the more rural areas, it wasn't like that. It's still not up to par, but Xinjiang there's been a lot of progress there. And it's hard to say that there's any kind of discrimination when Uyghurs live essentially comparable lives to their counterparts, 55 other ethnic groups.
I know I have my own answers, but I want to hear your thoughts on what is leading the U.S. to do this now. I mean, it's not like the U.S. 10 years ago was as hateful and as at odds with China, even though 10 years ago, China was not that different. So what is it that's changed for the United States where we now feel the need to, attempt to create another proxy war in Taiwan? We want to cut off trade in many ways. We want to create similar sanction regime to what we're doing with Russia. What has changed?
Well, there are a few things. One, we should focus on the U.S.'s own situation. So the United States, after 2007, 2008, the economic crisis, it kind of cemented what was already a precipitous decline in influence, right? The Afghanistan, Iraq wars, the wars in the Middle East, North Africa, disastrous. And then you enter the Obama period, where there were a lot of war without victories and a lot of costly, destabilizing world, imperialist interventions led by the United States, which only exacerbated the internal deficiencies of the U.S.'s system. And then on the other hand, you had China, which had not only had a change in leadership under Xi Jinping, but had also found that they had been able to develop to the point where they could look toward being more influential in taking more leadership in a multipolar world, and in developing initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative to try to develop South-South cooperation and lift the standards of living of countries all over the world and spread the gains that they've made in infrastructure, poverty alleviation, etc., because China sees that as beneficial for itself. If countries neighboring it, all the way into the European market, can have similar standards of living, well, that means you can grow even further. And that means that you can have more robust trade, and that you can develop even more intensely the technology and the capacity to address problems like climate change, which China is struggling mightily with, right? In terms of the fires and the heat and all of that. China has a huge commitment to reducing climate change because it is an existential crisis to itself and to the planet. And China sees the planet as very important to its own survival. So there was, I think, both China's rise happening more intensely in the last 10 years, meaning that China now has the capacity to be the largest economy very soon in the world, and in purchasing power parity terms already is, and that the US is declining, as well as, so there's those two factors. And then I think most importantly for me, because it's what will often go unsaid, is that the US actually does not like the example that China is setting in the world. This is very hard to hear for a lot of Americans and Westerners who have been fed
anti example, as it's called.
Right. So because of all the anti-China sentiment, this new Cold War atmosphere, people have a hard time hearing this, but China has been able to eradicate extreme poverty, and it's going to move toward eradicating relative poverty, meaning any kind of poverty.
And I just want to throw in there, some people don't, like, you can't even comprehend some of the numbers, but I like to keep them in there just to remind people. When we say that China eliminated extreme poverty, they took, I believe it's 800 million people out of extreme poverty over the past few decades. 800 million. That's more than 2 United States of extreme poverty eliminated. And that's not really denied by Western. You can find Reuters articles about that. And it's like that. I mean, that should be touted by every other country as like, wow, this is fucking incredible what they've done. But of course, it's ignored.
I mean, it's called,
you know, they have forced food fascism into people's mouths. You know, however,
it's part of the reason why global South countries really want to work with China, because China accounts for all of most of all poverty reduction over the past several decades. So, and that's a UN statistic. So China is doing that, but also, you know, you see all these sanctions right now on China that are very, you could say targeted around technology. So China is moving ahead of has moved ahead in most areas of high technology. So there's sanctions on Huawei because 5G over there, they're moving towards it's just way more advanced. Now the chips, China's moving really fast on semiconductors because of all the economic warfare being waged against it. And the United States is trying to tighten that noose. There's also the Xinjiang sanctions. So around these human rights abuses, there's also economic interests. The United States does not want China to be a world leader, which it already is, in renewable energy production. It already is. There's no stopping it, but they want to. The Biden administration wants to curb this because it really exposes how the United States is not doing enough And the capitalists, big capital in the US and in the Western world, they don't want to lay down the money to invest in renewable energy.
Can I propose they also want to stop large-scale renewable energy because the United States empire is based on the wealth of the petrodollar.
Exactly.
So you lose the petro part of the petrodollar, and the U.S. is even more fucked than they are now. So
it's the biggest polluter. It's the biggest polluter. It needs all of that energy, right? And so if China's going to be the biggest producer of this, replacing it, and in China, I mean, China itself accounts for more than half of all renewable energy production and consumption. You go there, you see it. It's clear. Even Australian media is admitting this, that China has had they're asking, what if China saves the world and nobody noticed? Because all we hear is propaganda about China, and we don't see that they're building all of the electric vehicles. They're building all of the high-speed rail. They're building all of the wind farms, all of the solar farms, and they're also exporting that cheaply around the world. So now the United States is sanctioning it and, increasing the cost, worsening inflation. And so all of this, right? All of this is because the United States needs to, as you said, protect its corporate interests, as well as it cannot have China being a leader in areas where the U.S. says it's so exceptional, and everything that the U.S. says about itself is kind of exposed when you have a bigger country like China. It's not like other countries don't have features like this. Cuba, Venezuela, other countries are doing really great things, right? But China is set to overtake the entire Western world economically, just in its size. So couple that with all of these examples of where the U.S. is coming up very short, and it is something that the U.S. ruling elite sees as just untenable and not tolerable.
Well, Danny, we've run out of time, but I want to make sure everybody follows your writing. You have your Patreon there on the screen for everybody, patreon.com/DannyHaiFeng. And how else can they follow your writing?
Sure. So you can follow me on Substack at chroniclesofhaifeng.substack.com. I do also write for Black Agenda Report and CGTN. And I've been doing more on YouTube, actually redesigning it now. And so search The Left Lens with Danny Haiphong. And yeah, I got a lot of great guests coming up. Vijay Prashad and Noam Chomsky actually this Friday, Ben Norton tomorrow. So subscribe there.
Cool. Thanks again, Danny.
Thank you, Lee. Appreciate it. Take care. Thanks again.
Talk soon. All right. There was Danny Haiphong. Hope you enjoyed that. I'm sure I'll have him back soon and to discuss all matters China again. And yeah, but he of course does not only write about China, but that is one of the areas where he is, one of the best. And but I thought this next story would fit in nicely with the hypocrisy of the United States pointing at China and saying, you don't treat your people right. This was just the other day, covered on Counterpunch. Oh, and by the way, in a few minutes, this feed will go to only rumble.com/Lee Camp, rumble.com/Lee Camp. It's free to watch over there, free to comment. So please join me over there. I've got to build that up because YouTube will just delete my shit. And they've banned over 1,000 videos globally of mine. So got to create something new that won't be censored. So rumble.com/Lee Camp. Join me over there. But Counterpunch, after years of tribal resistance, Department of Homeland Security finishes its virtual wall on the Tohono O'odham Nation. And if I mispronounce that, I'm sorry. But this is pretty incredible, and it has like zero coverage just about. This is a virtual wall, a virtual surveillance around a reservation to monitor everything they do. And it's really not being covered at all. And it was just completed the other day. Millions of dollars, cost millions of dollars. And you're going to love who helped build it. You really are. You just got to love it. You got to love it. So here's the reporter talking about going there. They say, I could see that Holmes and Tapawa, a community of 380 people backed by the verdant western side of the muscular, oh my God, mountain range. I can't pronounce that. Baba Quivari mountain range were easily in range of the tower's sophisticated camera system, which can see up to 7.5 miles from. Now, let me repeat that because you go by it so quickly. The camera system can see 7.5 miles. Jesus fuck. That's like, they could, they're like fucking 3 miles away and they can zoom in and tell you got a nasty blackhead situation on your nose you need to deal with. From where I stood amid, all right, I don't need the names of the cactuses or cacti. Jesus. From where I stood, the sweeping view was not to the south toward the border, because that's why they claimed they were putting these up, was to monitor the U.S. border with Mexico, but to the east and the interior of the reservation, which is the size of Connecticut. Or I don't know if they claim they were putting it up that reason there for that reason, but I'm just saying, like, people were okay with it because they were like, oh, it's on the border, so it's for border security. That's fine. The reporter continues, this wasn't any tower, it was the last tower. The Tohono O'odham Nation is the final region of, and had put up the most resistance to, the construction of about 50 IFTs across, what's that stand for again? The Integrated Fixed Tower. IFTs across southern Arizona under a contract that Customs and Border Protection issued to, here it is, Elbit Systems of America in 2014. Elbit Systems is an Israeli country. It's not a country, company. An Israeli company. During the proposal period, Elbit advertised itself as having 10 plus years securing the world's most challenging borders. Yeah, you think when you have a fucking apartheid state and you're occupying another people and you're fucking stealing their land, you think it's tough to monitor those borders? Funny how that is. Also, even though it's not tough to monitor Native Americans' borders, because it's not like there's fighting going on in the U.S. right now with Native Americans, but Native Americans have been more per capita killed, abused, oppressed, tortured than any other peoples in the U.S. And now we're like, oh, well, it works. It worked for fucking up the Palestinians. Okay, great. Well, we'll just bring it over here and we'll use it against the Native Americans. That sounds great. That sounds perfect. Oh, we've seen your lovely work with the Palestinians. So come on over and deliver that for us. The IFTs were designed to be the backbone of the U.S. border surveillance system, referred to sometimes as the, quote, virtual wall by officials, a layer of technological enforcement purposely positioned in the interior, usually 5 to 10 miles and sometimes further from the border. They were equipped with night vision. And wouldn't you love that? If there's any of you watching right now who are still thinking, look, if you aren't doing anything wrong, then there's nothing to complain about. If you aren't doing anything wrong, then you should want people with binoculars in your living room. If you aren't doing anything wrong, I always love the, if you aren't doing anything wrong. Yeah, anything wrong for who? If it's anything wrong for the fascist state, you should hope you're doing something wrong for a fascist state. Like, it's like the average German as the Nazis were rising, looking to other people and going, if you aren't doing anything wrong, what do you have to worry about? The Nazis will say, if you aren't doing anything wrong, like being Jewish. That's one of the dumbest fucking defenses. Oh, really tough not to slap anyone who still says that. You aren't doing anything wrong. If you never want any privacy again. But anyway, for any of those of you still say that, would you say that if they were watching with night vision cameras that can see 7.5 miles? They were equipped with night vision and thermal cameras. Thermal. Okay, so think about that. That means they can likely see you having sex. You know, it might just look like thermal blobs, but still see you having sex at 4 a.m., like through your walls, through your drapes. The thermal camera is just like, well, this orange blob seems to be bumping into that orange blob a lot. I mean, judging by the shape of the orange blobs, I think these two people do not. Let's just say they go heavy on the chicken nugget family package, the bucket of nugget that they sell at the local fast food. These two are not taking care of themselves so much, judging by their orange blobs. But let's see. There was, in 2018, Border Patrol agent Jacob Stukenberg told me the radar was, quote, far superior than anything else we've had before, and that one agent can surveil an area that it might take 100 agents on foot to surveil. Yeah, not only can one agent do it, but he can do it seeing through your walls. He can fucking see you in the dark. He can see you sitting in your car. The feeds from these towers, other camera systems, and motion sensors were displayed on monitors in a command and control center located along the U.S.-Mexico border and increasingly an agent's individual cell phones, and they were supported by drone surveillance. I mean, this is so fucking horrific and Orwellian. It's like, who in their right goddamn mind sits there and goes, well, this all sounds fine to me. I don't see what the problem is. It's just America. These Native Americans should be fine with in Arizona being monitored 24/7 in the dark, in the light. It's just insanity, man. And it is where everything's headed. It's where, right now it's done against Native American, right? Because they're a group that does not have a lot of political power in the United States. You might have noticed. And so that you can test this kind of surveillance, this kind of abuse, this kind of oppression. You meaning the government. I don't mean you. Hopefully you guys are not testing this on Native Americans. But the government can test this type of Orwellian shit on the most oppressed peoples because they tend to have, by definition, the least political power. Now, if you were to test this on fucking what are the rich towns, Newport, Connecticut, or whatever the towns are, in Connecticut and fucking outside New York City, where it's like every house is $1 billion. If they set up these towers outside the gated communities and we're like, what? If you aren't doing anything wrong, we're just watching you in your gated communities, in your yachts, seeing what you're doing on your yacht. You know what? If you're not doing anything wrong, what are you complaining about? If they set these up there, those people have a lot of political power and they could get that stopped. But you test this shit on people that are oppressed. And of course, it should infuriate everyone. But how hilarious is this when you think about this story in conjunction with the accusation that China is oppressing their people or surveilling their people, or like, okay, yeah, that if China's surveilling their people, which I believe they are, then you should be upset about it. But you know who can't say shit? It's the United States. With all of our fucking data being mined and surveilled. The Chakukuk officials, wow, I have no idea how that's pronounced, confirmed that the towers had been built and that the company had turned it over to the Department of Homeland Security in the spring. There were 10 towers designated for the Tohono O'odham Nation, 8 of them for this district. The deal was, again, to Elbit Systems, an Israeli company that specializes in monitoring and oppressing Palestinians. The original $140 million contract had expanded to a total of $218 million. So this Israeli company known for being really impressive at oppression. Hey, we're Elbit Systems. We're one of the most impressive when it comes to oppression. They're given $218 million to build this surveillance system. Meanwhile, there are 3,000, I showed the Reuters article the other day, 3,000 neighborhoods and localities across the United States that have elevated lead levels beyond Flint, Michigan. And that amount of money would solve that problem for at least some of those areas. Like, I love that we just throw money, just giant sacks of all the money we can fucking throw at surveillance and oppression and weapons contractors, all the awful shit where Congress is tripping over themselves to give billions to Ukrainian Nazis. But when it comes to, can we fix the water? Can we give health care to our people like every other developed country? Can we do any of those things? No, we don't have the money. Don't have the money. Sorry. But Elbit Systems wants to put in surveillance towers, state of the art, that can see you fucking in your bedroom. And we'll give them $218 million. Why not? All right, folks, this live stream still got a few more stories for you. It will continue at rumble.com/Lee Camp. Give me 1 second. I'll put the link in the comment thread here. But also, if you feel like you got $1 so far out of today's episode, I hope you will become a member at leecamp.net. You can become a member for free as well, but to become a full member, the minimum is $125 a week. All right, so I just put the link to the live stream in the comment thread. Go there now if you want to continue hanging out with me and hear the rest of these news stories. I'm going to show a video now. I'm not laughing at the kid getting attacked. I'm laughing at his fucking brutal heckling of Prince Andrew. Right? Prince Andrew is the one that is was besties with Jeffrey Epstein. And I say was because Epstein's no longer with us. And I think we should, think of how tough that must be for his close buddy Prince Andrew to have lost his friend, right? We should really take a second and pour